Hey YouTube friends, welcome to my book discussion series. In this video, I'm going to talk about The Highly Sensitive Person, How to Thrive When the World Overwhelms You by Elaine and Aron. If you suspect that you might be highly sensitive and you felt like you just never fit in, then this book might have as big of an impact on you as it did on me. For me, I've always felt like something was wrong with me and that maybe I'm just too sensitive, too weak, and too different to be here. Creating art was what initiated my healing process. I wrote a blog post that goes along with this video. I'll leave a link to that post in the description below, so if you'd like your own copy of the book, you don't have to buy the book if you're not looking to spend the cash. You can always rent the book from the library, as I do with most of my books that I read, and save yourself some money and spare some trees. Let's start with some pros of the book. Now, this is a fair warning that I have about 7 pros listed compared to only 2 cons. To be honest, I found this book to be so validating that it was difficult to find any negatives to talk about. With that said, some positives that you can expect from this book is that it will help both the highly sensitive person as well as the non-highly sensitive person. It will help both groups understand sensitivity as a trait and debunk many stereotypes and misconceptions that most people have about this trait. The second pro is that it also provides a number of coping strategies and tools to be a part of society that is predominantly non-sensitive. You can also expect it to be very informative about the strengths of someone who is highly sensitive instead of focusing only on the flaws. This book is a product of 5 years of research. It includes in-depth interviews, the author's clinical experiences, courses, and individual consultations, as well as insights from psychological research. If you are a highly sensitive person and you are reading this, you can benefit from the self-knowledge and the steps to reframe, heal, and help you with feeling okay when you need to be out in the world. One of the most positive aspects of this book is that the author has a lot of credibility and authority on the subject. She has experience as a research psychologist, a university professor, a psychotherapist, and most impactfully, a fellow highly sensitive person. Last but not least, there are self-tests to help you see where you fall on the sensitivity spectrum. Now, a couple cons that I felt were worth mentioning, but isn't enough to take any true value away from the book, is that it was published in 1996. Much of the information that were written at that time were only theories and results of the start of her research on this sensitivity trait. Aside from the author's note from 2016, which is in the beginning of the book, the rest of the book will not provide updated data and research. Although most of the most recent research that she mentioned in her author's note has proven that her theories from back then were to be true, don't expect to be updated regularly throughout the book with current statistics and studies on the topic that she discusses. The only other negative that I found was more of a personal preference. The book provides multiple stories and histories of people's personal experiences from her own work throughout the years. These people aren't in the public eye, so we wouldn't recognize them. There are a few, but not too many, incidences where she does mention famous people such as celebrities or politicians that we are already familiar with, so we can relate to them. It would have been nice to have been given more examples of people we might have already been previously familiar with, but I would assume the legalities of including that type of information would be very difficult. So like I claimed, it's more of a personal preference than an actual negative about the book. In the next section, I'm going to point out 6 specific circumstances or experiences that you may have in your life that would qualify you as someone who could highly benefit from reading this book. The first one is if you've been consistently labeled as too sensitive throughout your life. The second factor that you might want to pay attention to is if you happen to be someone who tends to need a lot of alone time in order for you to recharge, especially after a social or overstimulating circumstance such as a party or a concert. The third factor is if you can feel other people's emotions and have a hard time not letting it affect you. The fourth is you are highly intuitive, and sometimes that intuition actually hurts you more than it helps you, especially when you feel like you know too much too soon about someone you've just met. The fifth factor you want to pay attention to is if you think your sensitivity is a bad thing and you see it as a weakness. And the last is if you believe you are a highly sensitive person and you also know that you had a troubled childhood. If any of these 6 factors apply to you, especially if all 6 applies to you, then I would highly recommend you picking up this book and reading it for yourself so you can understand your trait better. Highly sensitive people make up about 15 to 20% of the population. If you happen to live in a society that values narcissism over empathy, that can just wreak havoc for the sensitive souls out there. The author goes into great detail about how recent studies are slowly proving that this trait is genetic and necessary for the survival of our species as a whole. With greater awareness of why we are the way we are, we can finally start to accept ourselves as we are and learn how to leverage our traits and empower them into becoming our greatest strengths. Now, I'd like to talk about 6 of my most valued takeaways. Even if you don't read the book for yourself, just listen to this part so you can relieve yourself of some of the pain and suffering that you might be enduring as a sensitive soul. The first takeaway is that you, my friend, are not flawed. Recent scientific research is pointing towards sensitivity as being genetic. Accepting this new truth can open up any insecurities you might have about your trait. More importantly, you can start to shift your perception and start looking at your sensitivity in a more positive light. Everyone has their good points and their bad points. The bad points can only hurt you if you let them by believing that it can hold you back from achieving your goals and your dreams in life. The second takeaway is that the knowledge gained from this book will equip you with higher self-awareness and practical health and lifestyle tips. As Aristotle once wisely stated, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Sometimes we resist getting to know the parts of ourselves that we are ashamed of or in denial about. This is also known as the shadow self. To counteract this defense mechanism, you can start by seeing yourself in a different light, starting with the previous point of shifting your perception about your sensitivity. Once you are able to accept yourself just as you are with little to no resistance, you will then be ready to fully embrace and learn about yourself on a much deeper level. Through self-awareness, you will be able to execute the health and lifestyle tips that this book provides for you. The third takeaway is the ability to reframe your childhood and reparent to yourself. Regardless if you had a good or unstable childhood, once we become adults, it is our responsibility to finish the process of growing up. Humans are flawed, and that's a known fact. Even the most well-meaning parents will still make mistakes, so it is up to us to do our part to heal ourselves. Remember that adopting this mentality does not excuse abusive or neglectful parenting. Likewise, it also does not give us the right to blame them for who we choose to become. We can start healing by giving to ourselves what our parents might not have given to us as children, whether that was attention, love, validation, or all of the above. There are very valuable tips on how to do this in the book. The next takeaway is how to handle your social life. One of the most difficult areas for highly sensitive people is our social relationships. Growing up, I moved pretty much every year and sometimes up to 2 to 3 times each year consecutively. In addition, I was also not allowed to socialize outside of my family and school because I was taught that people were dangerous. Being a highly sensitive person myself, combined with this type of upbringing, socializing became one of my biggest crutch in life. Quality over quantity seems to be the running motto for me and many other highly sensitive people. With the way our society is in the Western culture, you might catch some pushback with this type of mentality because they tend to value extroversion and insensitivity and sees introversion and sensitivity as a weakness. Equipping yourself with the knowledge of what our limits are and accepting our differences will empower us with the ability to socialize with less discomfort. Similarly to handling your social life, thriving in the workplace is also just as important, leading us to the fifth takeaway. Everybody wants to do what they love, but not everybody wants to pay you to do what you love. A good portion of the population would probably admit that they do not enjoy having to settle for the 9-to-5 type kind of job. Unfortunately, Highly sensitive people are even more sensitive to this type of struggle. Furthermore, the more sensitive types will have a harder time doing something for the sheer sake of money, especially when what they do does not align with their values or beliefs. Understanding how other highly sensitive people thrive in the workplace can be a great start to figuring out what you can do for yourself. There are many HSPs out there in a variety of vocations such as art, healthcare, teaching, and even business. Knowing the common pitfalls in these type of professions as a highly sensitive person can help you prepare for them and equip you with the right tools for those moments when it shows up for you. Now, for the last and probably most important takeaway is healing trauma. If you are a highly sensitive person and you are thriving in your life and do not struggle much from the traits and takeaways from this book discussion, it is most likely that you are blessed enough to have had a stable and supportive childhood. In contrast, the struggling highly sensitive person is probably the unhealed adult who came from a much more troubled and unstable upbringing and has a lot of healing to do. In either case, you might have some trauma or deep wounds that is in desperate need of healing, and healing can be the very first step in a difficult process for someone who is highly sensitive, especially when it comes to our reactions to medications, therapy, and most common treatments in the medical field today. Knowing and understanding how our body responds to common treatments is a key to our own healing. Toward the end of this book, the author goes into a brief description of the different types of treatments and what you should know about them as a highly sensitive person. If you have unhealed wounds or trauma, please seek help. There is no shame in reaching out for a hand to lift you up when you cannot do it yourself. That concludes our book discussion series. I hope it was informative and helpful for you to understand yourself better as a highly sensitive person. Before you leave, if you can just hit that like and subscribe button down to your lower right, and don't forget to hit that bell to let yourself be notified that I've uploaded my weekly Friday video. And I'll see all of you beautiful souls in the next video.